So hello, and welcome everyone to another Expert Sessions. Expert Sessions, as you already know, and if you don't know, these are spaces where operators open up their mental models, where we ask the questions that don't get asked on stage, and where we connect careers to our community. This week, I'm very excited to welcome Richard Cogswell, a UK-born sales leader now based in Singapore, a career spanning fintech, payments, and SaaS across APAC, Europe, and the US. Currently, Commercial Director APAC at PayDocker, formerly VP of Business Development at Neum, one of the fastest growing players in global payments, and now and also an award-winning author of the Cultural Sales Leader, which just won Axiom Business Book Gold in 2025. But beyond the resume, what stands out uh, is the through line. uh, Richard has built sales organizations that don't just hit numbers, they outlast pressure. Um, he treats culture not as a nice to have, but as a commercial lever. That's not obvious, and it's not easy, especially when you're leading across borders, time zones, and regulatory systems. So before we start, I just want to say thank you to our sponsors. We have more, which is amazing. Airmeet for giving us a stage that scales across time zones. Braze for helping brands build real customer relationships. PagBank for showing what's possible in financial innovation from Brazil to the world. Sinatra for reminding us that design, like culture, is what makes business memorable. And Richard, welcome. We always start with a provocation. The provocation for you is you've argued that culture is a commercial advantage, but isn't that just a convenient story for leaders who miss their numbers? In sales, don't results speak louder than culture?
Wow, I love that so much. Well, let's be very clear, I guess, in terms of what I'm really talking about and where I'm coming from. I'm not talking about culture in terms of, a kind of kumbaya, you don't need to make that last call, or it didn't matter that you missed your targets. What I am talking about is fusing your people to a well created, articulated, and aligned go to market plan. And I therefore suggest it's a combination of two things. I've been in enough environments where, you know, the commercial leader doesn't necessarily have an articulated go to market plan. And the danger then is that they can be drawn into short term sort of financial year to financial year sort of survival modes. What I am talking about is having done your detective work on an organization such that you know what your value propositions are, you know where to focus, you know about your people, you know about your data, and you've created this plan, you've shared it, articulated, and you've married your people to it, and that is transformational in my experience, and sort of helps break that financial year to financial year cycle. I totally agree with you on your point that the numbers are what you're measured on. And none of this is to say that you let go of any aggression or ambition in the marketplace. In actual fact, perhaps the most culturally sensitive or aligned company I ever worked for in my career was also the most ambitious, actually.
Mhm.
Um, so it's really about making the most of what is actually your greatest asset. But can often be quite siloed. Sales can be quite siloed from the rest of the business. And if you can bring all, supporting functions together on the same mission, in my experience,
Mhm.
you can do much more.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing. And I think to your point, I mentioned some of the sponsors that we had here, and it is a collective sport because in order to get the sponsors, one of the things that we've done was an event that built trust in Brazil, and I mean we needed people that are in the community and trust us, and they come from different roles. So and they were supporting in the trust building process. So sales is
Mm.
really uh, um, first I think it's real hard, right? You need to develop a certain, it takes a certain type of character, I guess, but it is a
Mm.
collective sports where people, they need to be supporting. So I think it's really interesting the point on being a siloed profession, like marketing tends to be as well, right? So thanks for
That's the
that.
danger,
Let's
right?
come. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Pardon? Go ahead. Go again. Go
No,
again.
I was just going to chime in and say that's the danger. I've been at very many organizations where you're absolutely right. Marketing is doing their own thing, sales is doing something else, and often the two are at odds with one another. Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
And it's the same with what you might say about ops, customer service, onboarding, relationship management. All these things can all be very split off and not aligned, in either in terms of success for the customer or success for the company, fundamentally. Yeah.
Brilliant. Let's cover your career. So you built a career
Sure.
in fintech payments across 3 continents. And what's the hardest market you had to sell into? And what did it teach you, Richard?
Wow. I think I came to Asia Pacific. I think it was 2009 for the first time, and it wasn't until 2012 that I actually moved here. And the thing that struck me, I was working for a European headquartered company at the time, but I've subsequently worked for US headquartered companies in Asia Pacific as well. And I think the region is often misunderstood, or at least, the danger is that companies often think that Asia Pacific is the same as Europe, right? Because Europe also
Mm-hmm.
many different cultures and different languages, and yes, there are differences, no doubt, but there's still, okay, I will be challenged perhaps to beat a German company, but I could go into Germany, and if I have a good value proposition, I can sell, right? And I can win in a way that is much harder in Asia Pacific, because the diversity is that much greater. And it's not just
Mm-hmm.
about language or inherent culture, it's about inherent business culture as well. And, you know, honestly, perhaps the hardest over time, the one that I've spent the most time sort of perfecting my approaches to, is what I would describe as North Asia, which really is Hong Kong, China. And Hong Kong, in the context of fintech and payments, is often the conduit for
Mm-hmm.
accessing Chinese customers, right? And what you have to learn is that you can never do it from an isolated standpoint. I can never just sit here in Singapore and hope to win Chinese customers. I have to be present. They're very trust and detailed and relationship driven buyers. But once they do have trust, and once they have this belief that you're there not just for the short term, but for the long term, and that your company will invest in people and infrastructure on the ground to support them, you will start to win business. But it's one that you can't expect to go in and suddenly, have customers in 6 months, right? It's going to take you a year probably. So I would say
Amazing.
it's
Yeah.
one of those, and you could say the same thing about Japan. Unless you've got people on
Mm-hmm.
the ground in Japan, that Japanese will never buy from you, but they'll happily talk to you all day long, and you learn something about the Asian yes, which can often mean no over time. So um, and ironically, we also have one of the most mature markets on the planet in Australia, which is actually a very European style marketplace,
Mm-hmm.
where, um, you know, whether you're a startup or you're an MNC, again, as long as you have a value proposition, people will buy from you. So you have this huge spread. And then, the final point I would make is the context of your industry. I guess Southeast Asia outside of Singapore is quite nascent in many ways in terms of what I do, sort of B2B payments, because there isn't the culture of companies being able to accept cards, for example, right? And you'll
Mm-hmm.
need to figure out these nuances, whatever your industry is, on top of learning how these customers buy across their cultures as well.
Richard, and living in Singapore now for years, how would you say that the leadership mindset um, in Asia and Singapore differs from Europe
Yeah.
or the US?
Yeah, I'll be a little careful in what I say here, because I don't want to be too generalist. But there are some differences. I think it's hard to break out of culture sometimes, and it's hard to break out of schooling, and it's then a lot of that is often reflected in the business environments that you come to. And I think from a very broad brushed sort of standpoint in Singapore, especially, um, and they're trying to fix this, by the way. There is often what we, from a European or from a global perspective, might consider to be a lack of initiative sometimes in decision making, and perhaps a very strong. It is respect, of course, but perhaps too strong a sort of alignment to I suppose the organizational structure. And what I mean by that is the thing that I noticed the most when I first came here is constant escalation, like absolutely any business point, right? And it's something that over time I try to break. And this is also something about building culture, which is to start to throw back escalations to say, well, who have you spoken to in the organization? What do you think that we can do? And of course, you've got to make instant decisions sometimes, but the more that you can do that, you can sort of start to break some of those, those sort of patterns, I suppose, to the betterment of your unit and an organization as well, right? Um,
Hmm.
so I certainly found that is that hierarchical piece is, and you can also see, and I've heard of, in response to that, you can get quite directional type leadership as well, right?
Hmm.
In organizations. So again, I think it's just being sensitive to those sort of factors as well, and gently try to prise people into zones of
Hmm.
what might be uncomfortable for them initially, but help to better them and also better the organization, hopefully.
Amazing. Richard, just so you know, we have several nationalities here with us.
Yeah,
Luke, he's an Aussie based in the UK. We have um, Nikolai, a Dane based in Spain.
yeah,
It's very interesting the type of profiles that we have here today. 13 people watching us live. I like to take what you just said and move to the next segment of our conversation, which is the cultural sales leader, which is your book.
yeah,
And you emphasize the cornerstone one pager. So can you walk us
yeah.
through how do you actually use with your team? And on top of that, there's something else that you also talk about, which is the importance of one-to-ones. And I recently saw the Jensen Huang. I'm not sure if you saw what he said about having one-to-ones with his
Mm,
NVIDIA team. So he's got 55 direct reports, and he discourages one-to-one. So I'd like you to talk about your framework, and then let's talk about
right.
the importance of
Okay.
one-to-ones
There's
when it comes
there's
to
okay. There's a few things in there. So let me give some context here. So what I really was trying to do in that book was to try to write the book that I was looking for at various stages of my sales career. And I very broadly define this as the moment when you're promoted with no training, right? And the danger is that you just get busy being busy,
Mhm.
and you get drawn into the trenches, and you're not really changing anything, right? You're manifesting the same stuff probably. Then there's where you've hopefully been successful. You've got a few miles under your belt, and you're asked to come and change something. Um, and again, there can be a rush to get busy being busy, and then there's the new start. And what I've then tried to do is to fuse all of this into what we talked about at the top, which is how do you then create culture? How do you then create the behaviors that create culture that lead to results? And the cornerstone is basically a one-page tool that I've come to use, which basically puts down a number of things that help to create and drive both the behaviors and the focuses. But what you must have done before you can create this thing is to have done your detective work on your organization, which is to say, you do know your people, you know your value propositions, you know perhaps where you should be focusing, and you have some sense of what your big bets are beyond the current focuses and what needs to be true to win. And then this document, I mean, it's really for everyone to make their own. But what I've put in there is obviously your financials around your current financial year. That's got to be in the headlights, where perhaps you're going in a 3 to 5 year journey in very summary form. Um, what your focuses are, what your cultural ambitions, what needs to be true, and what your main 3, 4 focuses are as a business as well as your own, right? So it sounds like there's a lot, but it can be summarized at a very high level. And then that can be used basically in all kinds of contexts when you're bringing somebody into the business, when you're starting off a sales kickoff, when you have other gatherings, perhaps with other business units. It's something that I would articulate with other adjacent departments as well as leadership, as well as my team, such that people can, if questioned, know what are the top 3 focuses that we're gunning for, what is the number that we're gunning for, and how their goals roll up into that. So it's something that I've used successfully in the past to start to change a dynamic or create a dynamic and then reinforce it over time. But I would say that the key is, as with anything like this, culture is something that you've got to keep an eye on. It's fragile.
Mhm.
You've got to iterate all the time, because once you've done your top 3 focuses, you've got to get into your next ones, and so on and so forth, right? So the cornerstone should never be static, but it's simply a tool that you can use to help people on that journey as well.
So the cornerstone is kind of like a one-pager framework where you have your
Yeah,
mental model on how you
absolutely.
operate, and yeah.
Yeah. And I think your piece about the one-to-ones, look, I think, not to get too reductive about it, but within any sales leadership context, you'll have your cadences, right? And
Hmm.
that's likely to be your sort of weekly tactical meetings, your monthly and quarterly more strategic ones, where you're looking back and looking forward to the next quarter as well. But within the context of that, I think you've got your daily type of touch points, right? Which could be about a
Hmm.
particular customer or particular challenge, or a coaching moment or whatever. But I think I would be a proponent of having, more scheduled, whatever you want to call it, check-ins, but time, whether it's just a half an hour walk with someone, where you're checking in beyond the performance metrics that you're all living and working with on a day-to-day basis. And you're seeking to get to know that person more in the context of what they're trying to achieve through their career, or what they're working through in the context of making themselves better, or what have you. So I think I'd love to see the comments. I mean, obviously that he's a terribly respected leader in so many ways, but I'd love to see the context of what he's saying there. Because what I
Hmm.
doubt he's saying is that you wouldn't want to have those moments of, you know, showing that you're available to one of your people, and also, it's also good for you, because these are moments where you get feedback, right? And if you're not seeking feedback,
Hmm.
that's how are you growing and learning and adapting as well, right? So I think there's, when you're trying to create a culture, I think creating a psychologically safe space where people can raise any topic, but also,
Hmm.
are fused, as I say, at the top, to the mission that we're all there to deliver on, for the benefit of our
Hmm.
customers. Any time that you're spending one-on-one with people it's got to be a good thing, I would argue.
I agree. Um, I think you didn't say it, but that's what I understood. That creating, somehow understanding your people, right? Understanding
Yeah.
what their goals are and what they want to achieve is key, is paramount for a successful organization, right?
Yeah,
And a relationship, really. It's the same in marriage. I need to understand
100%.
my right. And the question I had then is like, I worked for a leader once that he was, so he's the CEO of a large tech platform, and he was talking about intimacy and building
Mm,
intimacy with his direct reports. And he would say it's very difficult in the US typically for someone to use the same approach that I have, because I need to establish this relationship with an individual first and understand where they want to, what's important for them, and then
yeah,
show that the company can also be a driver for them to achieve their dreams,
yeah,
financially also, and whatever they want.
yeah.
And I think it's what you're saying. It's kind of like touching that.
No, I totally agree. I think, why do people stay or leave organizations? People will stay because they see success. They feel that they're a part of it. They see where their contribution, supports that success. But I think fundamentally they feel that they're growing, right? People leave for more money or for growth opportunities, I would
Mhm.
argue, but they will stay if they are consistently feeling that they're invested in and growing themselves. And that's the piece where, culture can get fragile, right? Because you're only one headhunter away from your culture
Mhm.
diminishing somewhat, right? And of course, if people are leaving, that tends to indicate there is something wrong somewhere, right? And yeah, intimacy is an interesting word because I, I I mean that has a lot of connotations, doesn't it? But I think what we're striving to do is to know something about what's motivating our folks, right? Such that we can create the environments where we can support them if they feel that they want to go in a certain direction, or if there are opportunities that can be made available for them as well, right? Um, and whilst you don't want to force anyone in, you don't want to make that a kind of false or forced interaction. you know you want to create the environment, like I say, a psychologically safe environment where people can feel that they are listened to, they're heard, and can be supported, right? So that's ultimately what we're striving to do.
Before we speak about the fintech industry and people leadership, I would ask you, where do you, that's a Brazilian expression, where do you drink your water? What type of knowledge do you like to consume? What
Oh,
do you think, helps you with your in your leadership style? And yeah.
yeah, I think a number of things there. I'm a great proponent of trying to gain feedback,
Mhm.
not just from colleagues, but that goes into wider life as well. I think it's very easy for us to go through life, and of course we are all our own heroes, right, of our own
Mhm.
stories. But sometimes you've got to create the environment where you can get feedback, and potentially feedback that might be a little challenging to you as well,
Mhm.
right? So I think, getting those inputs, and I think also network. I mean, network.
Mhm.
That's why I admire what you guys are doing so much, and it's great to have heard all those introductions earlier, and some of those motivations that people spoke to, because I think network can come in many shapes and forms, right? And obviously
Mhm.
we'll all as individuals have our networks within our companies, but outside of our companies. And I think that's a incredibly vibrant space where if you give it time and you invest in it, which I think is critical, because I think a lot of people either neglect to network or they only turn to
Mhm.
network when they need something, right?
Mhm.
And you actually invest in it and show up and offer something to it, that can be a really rich source of you know all kinds of knowledge, really, and support. So I think those two would be my top answers to you there.
Awesome. We'll touch a little bit on the fintech industry, some insights. But
Mm,
it's your first time here, Richard. We always open the stage for our members, again, network relationship building, I made a more like a challenging a post challenging some of the people that I know they're not showing up because they expect things to happen, and we hand them on a silver platter the opportunity to be here on a weekly basis. So we are consistent about it, so they can network with people that they wouldn't have the opportunity otherwise. You're sitting in Singapore, very accomplished guy. So and again, we are consistent, and we show by doing that. If you're consistent, things will happen. They take time, but they happen, right? But we will have people asking you, our members asking you questions, joining us. I just would like to touch a little bit the fintech industry and some industry insights. So at Neum and now PayDocker, you've worked at the heart of global payments. So what's the untold challenge of selling fintech solutions across borders?
Okay, well, fintech is a very broad church, right? So you often have to define first what aspect you're working in, right? I guess, I mean, let's look at it through the lens of a Neum. Neum's a company that does a lot of things. I personally have, in the last 8 years or so, been focusing on what you might call B2B card issuance, and very much virtual credit cards, single-use virtual credit cards, which are really in the domain of accounts payable, where companies are paying suppliers. And one of the main use cases is actually in the travel agency. So if you book with an OTA like Expedia, for example, they'll obviously collect your money through a payment gateway, which is another part of the fintech ecosystem. And then they will on-pay the airline or hotel, and that's really where a single-use card comes in. What I would say is true to whatever part of this ecosystem you're in, whether you're a consumer focused or B2B focused, or on the acquiring side, or doing cross-border money movement. I think the devil is always in the detail, right? No matter what you're trying to achieve. So, if you've got a customer from a money movement perspective who wants to either collect where they don't have entities and move money to where, suppliers are across the globe, you've got to consider a lot of things, which are, your compliance aspects, of understanding this company, what it's trying to achieve, and is it a credible company, and all these checks and so forth. You've got to understand where you can support, where you can't support, because you have difficulties with various currencies, and you might not be able to work with certain territories. And so often it's like I say, devil's in the detail always. And in terms of, I suppose this is good sales, 101 at the end of the day. The salespeople who understand their customers best, who can speak their customers' language, by which I mean their corporate language and the language of their challenges, and can bring a value proposition in the best way that they can to provide value. They're the people that will win. And I think fintech is largely about all of those aspects at the end of the day.
What do you predict as the next battleground in fintech in APAC? What's happening in the market?
There's always so much going on. Look, I think again, it's hard for me to not answer from a B2B perspective. So perhaps I'll start there. But I think crypto is starting to have a new frontier in terms of what you might call cross-border payments, the opportunity for stablecoin to help not only access some of the markets that are quite challenging to access from traditional products like card products, and even virtual cross-border money movement perspectives. I think crypto is especially with the new legislations that have been coming out of the US, I think there's going to be a huge amount there. B2B spend is always about the nascent markets. So in my part of the world, we're talking about the Indonesias, the Philippines, the Vietnams, and some others that have various challenges around acceptance. And in my part of the world, we're all trying to access Latin America, right? In shapes and forms. So it's always about expanding that network, being able to create options and things like that. AI, I know it's a buzzword all over the place, but I think it has real opportunities again within account payable books, where you might be working with global, local providers who will provide rebate, providers who will have speed of payment, cost of payment, and then AI could route across all of these in a very efficient way, perhaps. And then I guess from the consumer perspective, it's always more and more about, I think of MasterCard, they're getting into retinal authorization of payments, or at least that's going to come soon. Perhaps other methods, like you won't be carrying a card around anymore, but perhaps your fingerprint or something like that. These things are coming online as well, and we've already seen how cities are opening up because of being able to use cards and QR codes and things like this. So it's always got new frontiers all the time, I would say. So payments is one of the most vibrant environments to be in.
And it's really the infrastructure of it's kind of like the backbone of commerce, payments and logistics, isn't it?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
if you want to access new markets, you mentioned Latin America
yeah,
there,
yeah,
you need a payment infrastructure, you need logistics, and that's it. And everything else is it's cool,
yeah.
nice to have, but this is key, right?
And yet there are so many frictions still. So I think about, you could say a card, for example, a credit card is it's a traditional payment type. It's been around for all time as far as we're concerned, right? But often companies won't necessarily have integrated cards as part of their collections. And quite often, companies are surprised that when they do, they suddenly find a whole new audience and a whole new source of revenue streams, for example. So it could be very simple things like this, even um, that spark innovation or more volume or open up more new markets as well, right? So it's
Hmm.
and then everyone wants everything faster, better, immediately reconciled, you know. So there'll always be these improvements.
Brilliant. I'll start inviting. So yes, Hendrik, welcome. Hendrik is based in South Africa,
Hi,
so
Henrik.
specialist in marketplaces. Go ahead, Hendrik.
Um, Richard, firstly, thank you very much for sharing your life's work in a book. I think that's the ultimate pay-in for a sector. So thanks very much for that. I
Appreciate
have
it.
a question for you. Fintech is a very regulated sector. How does regulation and culture go hand in hand, or does it not? Thanks.
That's a great question. It's an interesting one because I guess the way I interpret your question is quite often where we have quite heavy compliance. I, as a salesperson, you might say burdens, but I don't want to I don't want to use that language. But you have these barriers potentially to entry, right? And it can be quite a fraught environment in the sense that um, you think about it. Any ecosystem, whether it's e-commerce, payments, you want to get your customers on and transacting as
Yep.
quickly as possible. And you might have made the sale a long time ago, but your compliance and onboarding process may be eking out to a number of months, right? Which gets frustrating to everyone. And I suppose from a cultural perspective, it gets a little difficult because by the nature of the regulations, by the nature of the compliance processes, compliance isn't necessarily as a department able to give you the answers as to why something's being held up. So what you're getting is constant, can we have this information, or can we have more documents, or can we have this or that or the other, which you then have to relay to the customer, and the customer might be getting frustrated with you. So I guess from a cultural perspective, you've got to kind of try and bridge that entire environment and do so in such a way that is understanding of what both sides are trying to achieve, and not lose the customer in the process, and not lose your colleagues in compliance in the process. So again, I think communication is a great part of that. Um, Trying to find more efficient ways to manage the customers, try and do things in a more automated way as much as possible as well. And trying also as part of the sale, I guess, to educate the customer through what you gain as an expertise, that there might be specific challenges that you need to address on the way. And I guess that's the way I would try to frame it, because again, like we talked at the top, where you can have departments at loggerheads with one another, well, that's something you want to obviously try and not achieve, and obviously try to achieve that both sides are understanding what you're trying to get to as a win and get there smoother, I suppose.
Yes, what you've explained is what I have experienced, in the sense that it's a timeless process. Having been on the other side of this, you get to a point where frustration and the time factor becomes a huge issue. So I'm glad that I'm not a madman, and I thought that was like unique. So appreciate your comments. Thanks a lot.
Pleasure. Thank you for the question. I love the emojis.
Hey, Helen, go ahead.
I was waiting on you. So Richard, nice to meet you. Thank you for your time and sharing your great experience as a leader, as a salesperson in B2B market. I'm also in the B2B market and also as a salesman, so it was really interesting for me. So thank you. I'd like to ask you your perspectives about as also in the B2B marketing. How do you see the future of sales? Let's say with people selling versus AI selling in the B2B market,
Yes.
because I believe it's different from B2C markets. So
Yes.
to
Yes.
hear your point of view.
That's an amazing question. Look, I'm something of an optimist, if I can put it that way, in the sense that I can see how AI might be perceived as a threat in many ways to salespeople doing what they do. But again, I go back to that point that the devil's in the detail. Now, of course, you can train an AI model to have access to expertise, but it's hard to give it access to experience, I suppose. And again, from where I come from, the fundamentals of selling are not just being expert in your product, but gaining expertise about your customer and what it is that they're fundamentally facing, what they're trying to achieve. And this is something that I've been lucky enough to have learned quite early in my career and developed over the course of my journey, that the more time that you're speaking to your customer and listening and asking questions and actively listening and replaying stuff and learning the language that they're using, you're all the while gaining a better capability of articulating what it is that they're facing in the context of your solution, as opposed to coming and speaking your language to them, right? And I go back as well, and I don't think it's, all those things I said about Asia Pacific, for example, about it being sort of very trust and relationship driven. I don't think that's unique to Asia Pacific. I think that's unique to many cultures and, many buying cultures across the globe as well. And at the end of the day, I think I've been successful in the past, and I've seen others be successful in the past because they've given that sense of trust between the two parties, such that the buyer feels, well, you understand, you get it, and therefore, even if you don't appear to have 100% solution, I think you're going to do a better job of solving for what I'm trying to achieve than somebody else. Now, I think AI is going to help people be better as salespeople, because I think a huge part of being a good salesperson is research. You know, I actually talk a lot about this in my second book, which is about how you network your way into job opportunities, actually. And I think a huge part of that is coming to an interview with a point of view. And you know, it doesn't matter if you're not 100% correct. If you're in the vicinity of 70 to 80% correct, someone's going to coach you to find those answers, right? And again, if you're taking that sort of McKinsey approach to selling and speaking to multiple parts of that buying organization, not just one, you're going to do a better job. So that's where I'm coming from on that topic. I think you're right. There is probably a differentiation between B2C and B2B in this context. And it has a lot to do with your product at the end of the day as well. You have an inherently complex product, or there are complexities around your regulations, as Hendrik touched on. Somebody, not maybe a machine, has to articulate that to the client, right? So yeah, I think I would suggest B2B sales with the human edge is going to be around for some time.
Great. Thank you, Richard. Great answer.
You can also use the Q&A. Perfect. Brilliant. Go ahead, Gustavo. Gustavo comes from payments as well. So
Oh, great. Evolve.
Yeah, sort of. But I'd like to tap on your leadership and sales experience. The other day
Yeah.
we were having a conversation, and we have this question, and I think that can connect and align with a lot of people from our community and in the business. So, how to align the expectations as a CEO or as a sales leader with expectations from your team, your sales team, when you feel that well, how to align the company growth and sales growth with team expectations when you see that the people on your team or your company, that they are comfortable with the situation that they are or with the stage that they are. So how do you believe a sales
Okay.
leader or a
Yeah.
company leader can align that and like push that without being like annoying, without being the, I won't say
Yeah.
the bad word, but yes, how to align that and help people
Sure.
to evolve or not.
Okay. I guess over time I've come to a very simplistic philosophy, which is to me a sales team is a bit like a car engine, right? In the sense that you've got big components and small components in there, and they can all be quite singular sometimes about what it is that they do, and that can be from a personality and an approach point of view. But if the engine is not working in harmony, then your journey's not going to be a very pleasant one, right? And what you're trying to do is create something that is going to get you to your destination, hopefully quickly and hopefully in a pleasant fashion. And so I think, you know, you've got to be conscious that, you know, you within a sales team, you could have relationship managers. Your language may change around that function, but what I'm talking about is people who own the strategic accounts, who may be really responsible for about 80% of your sort of financials ultimately. And then you will have like strategic salespeople or experienced salespeople who are going after big deals. You might have entry level and maybe people at the beginning of their careers as well to be mindful of. And I think often, I mean, I remember being, especially early in my career, so many organizations that are living financial year to financial year, and you get to that point where it's January 1st and you're all at the bottom of the mountain looking at this massive number, freaking out about how on earth I'm going to get there. And so what I learned to do quite early on was to start to think about all this process within your Q4, right? And to put some responsibility out to the salespeople, because I think your point is, if you're acting in a directional or directing type of way that is driving the number to people, and what is your contribution going to be? What is your commitment to this quarter, this month, whatever it might be? Then you can come across as that. Process, in Q4 and asking, and this is the process I kicked into. I basically asked my salespeople, you know your number's going to be within this kind of region. Do me 4 slides, and I'll give them the format, because otherwise you get all kinds of different formats back. But I'll give them a template basically saying, where are you going to find your business? What needs to be true to win? What investments do you need? What big bets do you need, right? Or a combination of these types of questions. Get them to pull that back to you by a certain time. Probably you're going to get a number delivered from on high, or you might be in an environment where you bring all this together and present it, but nonetheless you'll get some number back, right? But if you go through this process, you're already inviting your people to think creatively about their business and therefore the business. And it doesn't matter if you're that small component or that big component, everybody sees how they're contributing to it. And you're better able to go back to that kind of one-to-one question about having a more realizable conversation with an individual as well as the team, right? And the other thing that I found very helpful is that later on in Q4, when perhaps finance does give you a bigger number, you can have that kind of meeting where you're aligning the two, because these people have already presented what they have already bought into, because it's their numbers, their approach, right? And then you can do some gap filling. And then the other thing I think also is that you're in a better position come the beginning of the financial year to know what you want to bring down quickly, as in what is the big game you're after that is going to fill a good part of your year early, so you're not scrabbling around and panicking later on, right? So I think a combination of all of those things, if that answers your question, if I've interpreted your question correctly. And
Yeah. Totally. Thank you. And yes, but now I would like to go to the more the fintech and payment side. So as we've been seeing and for in this last uh, couple of years, uh, well, with all this situation of the world, like being like separated again, and with some sides and all of that. And I believe one of the sectors that is more that can be more affected is fintech and payments, and because of it's basically regulated, it's highly regulated, right?
yeah,
As Hendrik asked. And sorry, how do you see this situation nowadays when companies and fintechs are trying to go to different markets? And
yeah,
we could see, like, for example, it was another situation, but N26 here in Germany tried to go to Brazil and Latam. They retreat, and Revolut is now trying to tap into the Latam, and but I believe they're more robust and more in a bit more comfortable situation than the other player.
yeah.
And how do you see these fintech and payment internationalization and expansion with the situation of the world nowadays? Do you see some developments in different types of developments, and how do you see that?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge, right? But I think again, you've got to come at these things from a structured roadmap point of view. I again, if I can be simplistic about it, if you think back to sales organizations where someone is asking you what your commitment is, and if you've missed your commitment, how are you going to make it up? That can lead to a kind of scattergun approach where people are just selling. And sometimes the business that they do is not good business. So again, same thing in payments. You can get obsessed about having, Brazil, for example, right? But do you actually have customers? And if your roadmap and if your product sort of development is disconnected from the commercial side of the business, who are in the market, who you hope are having these kind of conversations, who should be, and this is again one of the things that I write about in the book. Honestly, it's how many organizations capture the data of the sales they cannot do as well as they capture the data of the sales they can do. Because at the end of the day, I think it's the responsibility of the commercial leader, in whatever their title is, to create the go-to-market plans and to be able to have an informed opinion for products and other parts of the company, to say our investments, our big bets need to be these countries, because I can see not the TTV that the consultant is giving you, I can see the ground up business that I could win tomorrow if we had it, right? So I think it's a combination of the two things. I think it's how can you realize, because we've all seen it, I think, where big fanfare, new currency comes, but the management will be like, well, where's the volume? And it's like, well, we haven't had any conversations around it. But then again, you have to be realistic. There are certain, like, it doesn't have to be political. Taiwanese dollar, for example, it's not an internationally recognized currency. So you could have customers who are demanding it because, of course, for FX reasons, for all kinds of reasons, they want to be able to pay in that domestic currency, but you can't bring it to life. So I think you've got to be very pointed about, if there is a political piece, or if it's, a conflict zone, or if there's some reason why it's not a currency you're ever going to bring online quickly, you've got to be honest about it. And even if you've got the biggest opportunity on the world, you've got to schedule it out and focus and finish on what you can bring to life, right? And again, I think
Yeah.
a large part of this is really about what I'm trying to also say, which is, in many ways, the commercial leader should take it upon themselves to ensure that they're aligning across the other parts of the business, and ensuring that there is a two-way understanding of what they're inherently trying to achieve, what you're trying to achieve, but to bring it to the customer reality on the ground as best as possible. And if you're not currently capturing that data, find ways to capture it, and incentivize and ensure that your folks know that they should be capturing it as well, because it's tomorrow's commission, it's tomorrow's meal, and all the rest of it, right?
Yes, yes, yes. I think it's also about uh, company focus and company and teams and alignment of with the teams, right? Because as you said, if
100%.
you're going to a
Yeah.
different market, and nowadays with regulations and all of that, if we don't have sales team and product teams and and development teams aligned on
Yeah.
what you should do and provide within the different markets,
Well,
it's
to be honest with you,
you.
this is also what I mean by culture, because again, what I'm
Mhm.
kind of in opposition to is that financial year to financial year kind of battle. Because what you're not doing within that is you're not looking to your 3 to 5 year horizons and what your big bets might be, right? And in changing culture such that you're getting your folks to think creatively about their business and therefore the business, and you're trying to get them to come up with answers before they escalate things to you, you're giving yourself that time to think more strategically. And again, this depends on the nature of your business and markets and so forth. But again, I think if you're not thinking in terms of that chart that says we're here in 3 years, I think we're here when we add this element and so on and so forth, you're kind of you're missing that transformational element that you can bring to your business as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Do we have anyone else, Gustavo? Because we're hitting the 56-minute
No, no,
mark
no. I don't think so.
plus the
We can
networking. Yes.
can
So yeah,
wrap up.
my final, I think just a question as a final reflection, or perhaps two. When you're hiring, Richard, because yeah, when you're hiring, what do you look for in a sales talent? I think that's one
Yeah.
question that I like to ask you. And then, what would you say to the younger Richard starting in his career? When you
Wow.
look back, what advice would you give yourself? When you're starting your career.
We need another 66 minutes for the. Well, the first one, I talk about this a lot in my next book, actually, again, which is about networking to find new job opportunities. I'm always disappointed and somewhat shocked by people who come to interview with you having done zero research, or perhaps they've just looked at your website, which can be difficult to interpret, right? And if you're on the outside looking in, if you're just coming sort of semi-cooked with some comments on what the website's told you, then I don't think you're preparing yourself to come with a good conversation, right? So I think what I'm looking for is people who got some sort of innate sense of curiosity, who've done some work, and frankly who've got the guts really to come with some opinions about where they see their value fitting into what they perceive your goals and outcomes are, and potentially what your challenges might be. And I don't think that's too big an ask, because I think if you're not dipping into your network first before putting your CV in, and if you're not talking to people that you might know who are either connected or worked at companies that the person you're going to interview with has worked at, or learned a little bit, you're missing something. So I think it's the softer skills that sort of show initiative, drive, growth, and like I say, that the guts not to know that you don't have to be 100% correct, because at least if you come, a better conversation is going to come, and hopefully the person on the other side is more likely to coach you a little bit, right? And in terms of lessons, wow, where to start? I think I was in too much of a hurry. I think this is why I write specifically about that moment when you're promoted with no training. It took me about a year and a half from being the best salesperson lifted into a sales leadership position. It took me a year and a half before I asked for any investment in myself, because I felt like, oh crikey, I've got to perform here. I've got to give back, having been given this opportunity. And again, I think my reflection on that, and of course it's easier to say it with the distance of a number of years, is that you're not really changing anything. You're just bringing more energy, perhaps. You're bringing perhaps if it's in your personality, some of your experiences to try to help and develop others, perhaps, but you're not going to change that environment from where it was necessarily before in you know, unless you're realizing that you need to be invested in and you're as important an asset, right, as anybody else. So I guess it's the confidence to not have all the answers and to be confident in what you do know, that got you there, but to also know that to get there, you're going to need something else. So, you know, but that's an awful lot to navigate, I suppose, in these situations where you're promoted and you realize that everything has changed. All your relationships have changed. The job is very different, right? And like I say, it's very easy then to get sucked into the trenches and the day-to-day kind of, you know, tactical warfare as opposed to thinking things through and approaching it differently.
I think it's I would say a great football player or a sports player won't make a great coach necessarily, right?
Right.
So
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. I mean, different skills, and I think you know that's the role of having. One of the reasons why I love doing this, what we're doing, is it just expands my repertoire, if you like. I've been creating content for a long time, so it enables me to understand more about your world, which is leadership and sales and fintech. But it becomes I can learn about, I can just expand my views and, you know, like become better at having conversations as well, and understanding a bit more about what do you go through. And yeah, so I think repertoire these days is so important, Richard, in my opinion, right, for anyone, because yeah, in sales, and you know, you just become more like a wealthier person in terms of knowledge, right?
I 100% agree. Couldn't have said it better.
Amazing. Richard Cogswell, ladies and gents. Richard, thank you very much for not just sharing tactics, but for showing us how to think about leadership and leadership as a repeatable advantage. And to our members, this is Evolve, or our lens in action, from Martin last week on partnerships and the 4 Cs, to Richard today on culture and commercial performance. We also have our upcoming conversations in London, Copenhagen, and Lisbon. So more on that soon. And again, at Evolve, we don't collect speakers, we collect clarity. Thank you very much, and see you next time. Richard, I'll catch you in the
Thank
backstage.
you so much. Thank you, everyone. Great to meet you all. Thank you.